So we are now streaming live to Facebook. Thanks to all of you who are here in the audience for the first part of our Power Behind the Badge teach-in series. We're really excited to be starting off this series to build community awareness, understanding, and also move towards action. And so we have a really incredible group of panelists to talk to you all today who are all doing this work day in and day out, and all have been working on the system from different perspectives and different points. So really excited for them to share their perspectives and also share ways that you all can get involved and get activated to transform public safety. We also have some great tools to understand and do a power analysis of how public safety even works in the city of St. Louis. So we'll look at who are the traditional decision makers, power brokers, the people that could be changing the policies and aren't, so that we can all better leverage our voice and our unique power sets to actually change things towards equity and towards a more holistic public safety system that doesn't rely on arrests and incarceration. And so with that, we'll do a really quick round of the people that we have here today to talk to you. Then we'll get grounded in a few virtual agreements for how we're going to show up in this space and how we hope that you attendees will be part of the conversation. And then we'll jump into some of the community tools. So my name is David Dwight. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the executive director and lead catalyst at Forward Through Ferguson. And really excited to be with you all today. Trey, could you give a quick intro?
Yeah. Hey, everyone. My name is Trayvon Latimer. I go by Trey. I am a Justice for All Policy Advocacy Fellow at Forward Through Ferguson. And I'm super excited about tonight, helping to educate the community on these very important issues. So thanks.
And so in a second, we'll have our, actually not in a second, in about like 20 minutes, we'll have our panelists introduce themselves and say a little bit more about their work. But I'll give a quick round of intros. So we have Inez Bordeaux from ArchCity Defenders, Megan Betts, Northside Neighbors United, Rasheen Aldridge, I was a Missouri State Rep for the 78th District, Cristina Garmendia, who was the project lead for the 2018 Equity Indicators tool, and of course, Jay Shepard from Action St. Louis. And so with that, I'm going to pull up a few agreements for how we're going to show up tonight. Notice the chat box that's there. We really want you all to be engaged in the conversation, asking questions, sharing what you've seen, what you've heard, what you've experienced, and the solutions that you see for us to truly transform our public safety system to be more equitable. And so to think about how we hope that you all will show up with us this evening, please express those aha moments. A speaker said something really amazing that resonated with you, say that in the chat box, something that surprises you. If there are any needs, if you have any questions about what's been said, put in the chat box. We're really excited to engage with you all. Use I statements, speak to yourself and to your experience. Don't try and speak to others' experiences. Assume good intentions. We're all here to transform the system radically toward that really centers the health and well-being of Black and Brown people. Lean in, lean out, give as much space as you take. Consider your positionality, so practice that power analysis. Think about what it means with your particular identities for what you're saying in the space. Expect discomfort and ambiguity because we are dismantling several hundred years of systemic racism that still persists in our system. So it's going to have some discomfort and ambiguity. And also, if we do give you an opportunity to ask a question of the panelists, just wait your turn to speak. And so a little bit about Forward Through Ferguson. So we were created after the Ferguson Commission, which was itself created after hundreds and thousands of young Black and Brown people marched in the streets after the killing of Michael Brown Jr. By a white police officer. And because of the raising of their voices, it launched and ignited a huge amount of activism and organizations who are still doing amazing work in St. Louis today, some of which are here on the panel. We're really excited for you to learn about. The Ferguson Commission was created out of that, in response to that unrest and out of that, and ended up engaging over 3,000 community members to really get to what are the root causes of racial inequity. And as we've existed forward through Ferguson, we've seen that out of all the areas that the Ferguson Commission looked at and the calls to action that they raised up, Justice for All has persistently been the one that has had the most resistance to true change. That here we are 6 years later, after the igniting of a global movement for Black lives. And unfortunately, in the city of St. Louis, there have been next to no significant policy changes in our public safety practices, except close the workhouse, whoop, whoop. Shout out Inez and Jay, and to all the other amazing people who led that campaign. And so with that, I will go ahead and talk a little bit about a set of demands that a group of community organizers put together, and community organizations put together after the murder of George Floyd and the increased interest on police brutality issues for the changes that we needed to see. So we encourage you to sign on to this list of demands. Some of the organizations here in the room, including ArchCity, Bordeaux, Ferguson, and Action St. Louis, helped to create these. And so we just wanted to call attention to it before we get into some of the teach-in. So definitely take a chance to read through this, but I'll just lift up some of the things that were in this. So it demanded that no CARES Act funds from COVID-19 relief go to the police department, that it actually go to health systems, to direct service, and to actually things that will support the opportunity to thrive for our residents in these unprecedented times. Demanding that the workhouse jail is closed, achieved, and there's some great organizations that are continuing that advocacy to make sure it gets implemented correctly and that the money gets spent right. Demanding the immediate suspension of contract negotiations with the St. Louis Police Officers Association. The union contract is such a barrier to accountability for police officers and for police departments across the country and in the city for the Metropolitan Police Department. So it names some demands there, and we'll talk about that more later. To the immediate release of a full, detailed, unredacted line item budget for the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department. As hard as it may seem to believe, we pay tax dollars that go into our government system that are supposed to be transparent for how they're spent. And the line item budget for the police department is not available publicly. It's not even available for most alders, for most of our aldermen and alderwomen across the city, and is unacceptable for a public department that, again, we pay our tax dollars towards. And then lastly is around this invest divest piece. So demanding a halt to any increases in the police budget so that we can get access to that line item budget and figure out ways that we can reallocate those funds to actually support the opportunity to thrive for residents. And as I wanted to give some space, or Jay, because you both were, and your organizations were also big in putting this together, if there's anything that you want to say or comment about it.
I mean, I think the demands pretty much sum it up. I'm not sure really what I could add to these 5 demands. So they all revolve around defunding the police in some way, shape, or form. They all relate to divesting from the carceral state and investing in people and communities. So I'm not sure what else I can add to that.
Yeah,
Jay?
I don't want to add either.
So we're raising these demands up again. We know with all the killings of unarmed or armed Black people, trans people across the country, that unfortunately it waxes and wanes in the public like knowledge and focus. And we are in this moment with where what's happening in Portland and in Kenosha is focusing more intent on police brutality and police violence. And so be on the lookout in the coming months for more advocacy items and action items for how we can advocate for these changes here in St. Louis. So be on the lookout. And with that, I'm going to pass it to Trey to talk about our first tool.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to share my screen. So again, thank you all for coming on. This is very exciting for me. As I know, community education is, can you still see the map? Okay. Community education is super important when we talk about process and power, and that there are a lot of like bureaucratic things that happen within, our government and within the Department of Public Safety that people aren't aware of. And when we talk about, as you can see in this map, interactions with, police officers to civilians, there's so much underneath that happens beforehand. There's so much that, the community isn't always aware of. So I just want to like highlight a few things within this map, and then we'll go into another map too, talking about certain like budgeting processes, legislative processes, just to give some language to what you see in this. So I can get started there. So the way that I want to split up this map is to talk about first, this map is who controls policing in St. Louis City. The purpose of this map is to see what elected actors, so how do our elected officials and unelected officials that are in public safety and government influence the public safety department and overall public safety. And it's important to understand this. So I want to split this up into focusing on the elected actors that influence public safety and unelected actors that influence it, and the policies that they influence. And then we'll take questions from the audience as well. So if you have questions in your head as I speak, please type them in the chat. We'll be happy to answer them as best as we can. So let's dive in. So I want to focus at the bottom as this map goes from the bottom up. And you can also access these maps. Dave, you want to put the link in the chat? Great. You can also access this map yourself and go through them however much you want. Again, this is a very general overview, so I can't go into the nitty gritty of each actor. That could be hour or two long conversation about each actor. So if you go to this, you can also click on each one, and it'll show you different links that you can click on to get more in-depth information. So starting at the bottom, as you know, us civilians have voting power. So we vote all of the elected actors into office. So that includes the mayor, the comptroller, the Board of Aldermen president, the Board of Aldermen, and also our Missouri legislature and governor. And we have a state rep on tonight, Rasheen, who I'm excited to speak to. And so let's start there. So our Missouri legislature involves, the state reps, the state senators, and they, along with the governor and along with other Missouri legislatures across the state, create and modify state statutes. And then in connection with the Missouri State Constitution, the state statutes, they both constrain and make up the city charter. So just how the US has a constitution, Missouri has a constitution, St. Louis also has a constitution in the form of the city charter. And this block down here makes up the legal, it's like the legal foundation for everything that is allowed to happen up top. So it's important to understand that a lot of the laws and regulations that exist within the city charter and the Constitution at large. Honing in on the mayor. So the current mayor is Lyda Krewson, and she has a lot of influence over public safety. I'm going to go from the left, and I'm going to go around to the different arrows that she is pointing to. So the mayor, she is the, you consider her the chief executive officer of St. Louis City. She enforces all ordinances and approves or vetoes ordinances created by the Board of Aldermen. So this first arrow on the left is, if you go up, in partnership with the Director of Personnel, which is the Human Resources Department within the St. Louis government. She and Richard Frank, who was the director of that department, negotiates with the St. Louis Police Officers Association, SLPOA. So SLPOA is a union that, a labor union, just like teachers have unions, other workers have unions, that represents the needs of people represents the needs of police officers and fights for certain working conditions for police. So they hold a lot of power, not just here in St. Louis, but other police unions across the country hold a lot of power in the way that they negotiate their police union contracts. So the police union contract is also known as a collective bargaining agreement, and it's largely negotiated outside of the public view. So I believe St. Louis happens about every 3 years. So the last one that was formed was in 2017. So I believe that the negotiations are going on right now, but again, the process is really hidden from the public. So really don't know much that's going on there. But that is a point to really pick at and to focus on. In the police union contract, it contains the terms of the police officer's employment, including how they are disciplined and held accountable for their actions. And more focus needs to be here when we talk about police accountability, because a lot of things that they can be legally held accountable for are outlined in that police union contract. And as you see these arrows, it points to the Director of Public Safety, Chief of Police, and the police officers. It constrains them, but also protects them from a lot of their actions as well. So if you want more information, click on this. It can show you our police union contract. Moving on, the mayor also has a lot of influence over the city budget. So she, the comptroller, and the Board of Aldermen president are all on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. The Board of Estimate and Apportionment is only made up of those 3 actors, and it approves all real estate purchases, how much money is set aside for certain city operations, and it's in charge of enacting the city's annual operating budget, which again is a large focus right now when we talk about police allocation and defunding the police. Looking at budgets and see how much money cities like St. Louis put towards public safety and police. And there's a whole budget process that we'll briefly talk about in the next map. But in general, the budget division gives the Board of Estimate and Apportionment their budget, and they submit that to the Board of Aldermen for approval. So the Board of Estimate and Apportionment and Board of Aldermen kind of go back and forth as they request changes and approves the things that are the line items that are outlined in the budget. And once that's approved, the city budget is made, it's operated. And then in the year 2021, for the next fiscal year, they allocated around $358 million to the Department of Public Safety, which is a lot of money. And that's given to the Director of Public Safety, who is in charge of that. But we'll get into that a little later. The mayor also is in charge of hiring the Director of Public Safety, who is currently Jimmy Edwards. And she can also fire the Director of Public Safety as well, but she can't fire him without reasonable cause. So she's in charge of who is in that seat. Lastly, the mayor, if you look at this arrow that points all the way up to the Civilian Oversight Board, the Civilian Oversight Board, which was established in 2015, reviews and investigates citizen complaints against alleged misconduct of police officers. And we'll talk more about how civilians can report abuse or any misconduct from police officers. But the mayor nominates and appoints members to the Civilian Oversight Board. People can apply to be nominated, but she's in charge of that process. But the Board of Aldermen also has to approve those people. So you can see the link there in this line. So those are the major influences of the mayor. Again, you know, there's a lot underneath that and a lot more to talk about, but we have limited time now. Moving on to the comptroller. So if you think of the mayor as the chief executive officer, the comptroller is the chief financial officer, the CFO of the city. So she oversees the city's daily financial operations and all of the economic development strategies within the city of St. Louis. And she also sits on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, as we know, has a large influence over the city budget. Moving to the right, the Board of Aldermen president, his title tells who he is, president of the Board of Aldermen. He precedes over all of the operations of the Board of Aldermen. He can appoint aldermen to all the committees that the Board of Aldermen make up. He's in charge of appointing them as chairs and members. He also sits on each committee as a member as well. So he holds a lot of power in assigning Board of Aldermen to committees like the Public Safety Committee, which we'll talk about in a second. And he also sits on the Board of Estimate and Apportionment again, that is made up of the city budget. The Board of Aldermen is our legislative body in the city of St. Louis. There are 28 alders, coinciding with 28 wards in the city. And they have a lot of power as well over public safety. So again, they request changes and approves the city budget that's given to them by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. They are in charge of creating and modifying public safety ordinances, and we'll kind of talk about how a bill is created or how a bill is introduced and can possibly become an ordinance in the next map. But as David said, in the last 6 years, there hasn't been any major police reform bill that has been passed amongst the Board of Aldermen. Additionally, 7 alders make up the Public Safety Committee, the Board of Aldermen Public Safety Committee. This Public Safety Committee considers all matters pertaining to the Department of Public Safety and Police Department, including any board bills related to public safety and policing. So if there's a police reform bill introduced, and this is the committee that oversees that process and amends it and considers it there. And we'll also talk about, once we talk about the Director of Public Safety, how the annual public safety plan plays into how they operate. So that's the elected actors. Again, that's a super general overview. Really quickly going into the unelected actors. We already talked about SOPOA, the Director of Personnel, honing in to the Department of Public Safety up top. So the Director of Public Safety, who is currently Jimmy Edwards, oversees the largest government department in the city of St. Louis, which is the Public Safety Department. He's in charge of all the department's operations, including the police department, which sits inside of this Public Safety Department. So he has a lot of power over how the city handles issues of safety and violence prevention and fighting violence in the city. Again, he is constrained and protected by the police union contract, and he's hired and appointed by the mayor. He also is in charge of the $358 million that was given to the Department of Public Safety and make sure that it's spent accordingly, according to the budget. And he also is in charge of the annual public safety plan. So in my research of this and just the research in general, there were a lot of things about this map that were kind of unclear. And this is an unclear process on how the annual public safety plan is made. There was an ordinance passed, I believe, in 2018 that I think introduced by Louis Reed as well, that made the Director of Public Safety write a annual public safety plan that he is to introduce to the Board of Aldermen for approval, or just introduce to the Board of Aldermen and write one so you can have a general direction of the department. But you can't find the plan anywhere. I'm not 100% sure if this process actually happens, but legally it is an ordinance. It's something that I believe if it does happen, is pretty important if it lays out his philosophy on how he's going to fight violent crime in the city. Moving on, he also is in charge of hiring and firing the chief of police, of course, with input from the mayor as well. The current chief of police, also called the police commissioner, is John Hayden. He oversees the entire police department, which has over 1,300 officers and 400 civilian employees. And this includes managing the police budget. The police budget currently is about 1/3 of the general funds budget in St. Louis City. So a lot of money to spend and to oversee. He is in charge. We'll come back to his role in the Civilian Oversight Board. But he is overriding and controlling the police manual policies, special orders, temporary directives, all of the legal documents that regulate the roles of police officers in the city of St. Louis. And it's also important to note that we added verbal and unofficial orders. So these are all of the orders and all of like the direct demands and orders that he gives his police officers that we don't see, that aren't written down. And it's important to include that because, a lot of how the police operates in the city is determined by what he says and not necessarily what is always written. When we talk about culture and norms, talk about bias, and racism within police departments, that definitely contributes to that. If he's given like verbal and unofficial orders that are contradictory to police duties. And as you know, all of this happens and then officers interact directly with civilians. And as you see, all this is underneath that. And really quickly, as far as filing complaints against police officers, civilians have a few different ways to do this. They can either go straight to the Civilian Oversight Board, so they want outside independent body like the COB. They can complain directly to them, and then they communicate with the chief of police on the instance. Or they can go straight to the police department, SLMP, the internal affairs, and they handle the investigation and see what the issue is. You also have the Post Police Officer Standards and Training. So this is the state level organization that oversees police in Missouri. You can also, if you want to take it to the state level, you can also make a complaint there, and they can suspend licenses and do the things that they do. But they'll work in coordination with the local body, of course. And then you also have the Force Investigative Unit. So this unit is in charge of investigating all police officer shooting incidents. So if there's a shooting that involves a police officer, then they automatically investigate that every single time. And then these, like the complaints or the Force Investigative Unit investigations are significant or major enough, then they are taken to the circuit attorney's office, which is separate from all of this. Lastly, if a police officer thinks that if they're disciplined unfairly or treated unfairly from a case or a complaint that was made against them, they can take that case to the Civil Service Commission, and this entity can determine if their appeal is warranted or not, and determine how to move forward with that. And it's also important to know that the Director of Personnel, which we saw over here negotiating police union contracts, is the secretary of this commission, which is a important connection, I believe. And that's true for all city employees. Whew, I talked a lot. Do you all have questions about this map? I know that I talked a lot, probably talked fast, but there's a lot to this. So maybe like 5 or so minutes for questions. That good?
We have a couple questions.
Cool.
So Wally asks if that the Ethical Society of Police, which is the predominantly Black police union in the city that actually just expanded into the county, they released a report recently that emphasizes putting police under the civil service rules versus having a separate discipline system, which right now the chief has power completely over, and asks if there's any reasons why it's not in our set of demands from earlier this summer. And I can answer that.
Yeah.
So it's not that it might not be a good way to get accountability. I think it was partly because the group of organizations were really looking for what is transformative to changing the public safety system. Like, how are we reorienting it under a new set of values? And there's a lot of charter fights to be had over whether civil service can take that power over it, or even if the leadership is willing to leverage that kind of power. And so I think that's some of the reasons that it didn't make that initial cut of demands. Not because it isn't a good opportunity, because police officers are city employees that should be subject to the same rules, but
right,
make the cut.
Any other questions?
There's one question about defunding the police. A lot of folks I'm around are concerned that defunding police sounds like they won't be around to protect us in our communities. I know that they have a problem with killing us, but in my neighborhood, they also protect us. Is that a legit concern? Asking for a friend? Any of the panelists want to take that one on?
Part of me wants to ask, I mean, it's a very valid concern. I know there are lots of people in communities who are scared of the idea of defunding the police because they see the police as providing, an essential service to their neighborhoods and keeping them safe and so on and so forth. But my question would be, how are the police keeping you safe? Like, I'd like to know, what are they doing that is making you feel safe? Is it patrols? Is it just the perceived presence of them in your neighborhood? I'd like to know what that is, because I'm almost willing to guarantee that whatever safety you feel like the police are providing can be applied in the same way with even better quality and care and compassion by people who are expertly trained in that area. Like, if you're talking about child welfare, there are professionals that can handle that. If you're talking about, support for your community, there are professionals that can handle that. If you're talking about assistance with people who may be suffering with drug addictions, there are professionals that can handle that, who don't also drive in neighborhoods with guns and terrorize and kill Black folks. So when you're thinking these thoughts and when you're asking yourselves these questions, I just want you to ask, what do the police actually do? Like, what do they do? And then think about, like, if your house is on fire and you call 911, who shows up? The fire department, because those are the people trained to deal with that problem. A police officer with a badge and a gun doesn't show up because they are not qualified to deal with that situation. If we're talking about dealing with like people who are suffering from drug addiction, if you call 911, instead of the police showing up with a gun and a badge and terrorizing that community, what if we just sent like an addiction counselor or someone who is qualified in that particular field out to help you? So the same services can be used and benefited in your or you can benefit from them in your neighborhood. It just doesn't have to be from the St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department that happens to kill more people per capita than any other police department in the entire country. So, but I'm sure we can get more into this discussion like a little later.
I appreciate that wisdom though, and we definitely will talk about that more later in the panel. Maybe one more question, Trey, before we go to the next thing. So I see, are the recent changes because of recent legislation for the Circuit Attorney's Office going to change any of what's on this map?
I don't believe so. I'm not sure. I don't think I'm super familiar with the changes that are happening in their office. But I do know as it relates to this map, if there are like, if they need to take it to state level action on any investigation that they have dealing with police, then they take it to the Circuit Attorney's Office. But I don't think so, no. Does anybody, any of the panelists know any specifics about that?
Yeah, I would say as being in the legislator, I think to the question of what's being raised. So, and I'm not gonna get into the deep weeds of it because I think it's kind of part of my question later down the line. But so if the House, which the Senate 2 days ago stayed up to like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. Because we're in special session right now in the House and then the Senate side around a quote unquote violence bill. Several pieces that actually supposed to really address violence in the city of St. Louis, which we know that it is not really addressing violence. I'll get to that later. It's all really political rhetoric, and it's election year and folks are trying to pander to their base. But one of the bills that at the last minute that Parsons is trying to bring up is after 90 days, if Kim Gardner does not take a case that is still pending and has not been investigated, with the request of the police department that they can ask for the Attorney General to come in and potentially investigate a case. So that would take away some power from Kim and trying to give power to our Attorney General. So I don't know what that would do to the map, but if that does pass the House, which it passed the Senate, we killed it in the House, but it passed the Senate, is coming back to the House, that would change far as her investigation process if a case has not been investigated by, I think, like I said, it's 90 days, which is like 3 months, with the police demanding or asking the AG to come in, then the AG then will have the control to investigate the certain case that they are asking for.
Thanks for that, Rasheen.
And I just want to be clear, it's only happening in the city of St. Louis by a non-elected governor and a non-elected attorney general, when the circuit attorney has won her election, not once, but twice overwhelmingly in the city.
A very important point. So thanks for that. So for everybody in the audience, we're going to go through one more tool focused on the Board of Alders, and then we're gonna get the panelists in on the conversation completely and start to get deeper into this. And so just some context before Trey gets into it. Like we've said so far, the Board of Alders has not put forth any significant changes to our public safety policies or any kind of accountability bills, besides, with exception to close the workhouse, which is after years of community effort to raise this issue. We didn't have local control of our police department, which was a remnant of a literally Civil War era policy decision where the state took control of St. Louis City's police department at the time because they didn't want the city to have a militia, which was at that time still a more progressive place than the rest of the state. And so they took control of our local police department and made a statewide board. And it wasn't until 7 years ago that we actually got local control of our own police department, which then meant under the charter, the Board of Alders does have power to legislate changes over the police department, but it has never flexed that power. And so with that context, I'll pass it to Trey.
Cool. Yeah. And thanks again, Rasheen, for that. That was really, really informative. I'm excited to know more about that in the panel discussion. But this one should be really quick. So this one is more about process than it is about individual actors, unelected actors. So as you can see down here in the, trying to zoom in. We see down here in the key, you will see that you have, we're gonna talk about the budget process, the legislative process, the civilian oversight board appointment process, and then this annual public safety plan process, which we really don't know happens. So if you, actually let me do this, there we go. If we zoom in, starting with the budget process. So this process is pretty straightforward. So the city budget division, who is in charge of all the budgeting processes in the budget in the city, they contact, at a certain point in the year, they contact all the departments within the city, all the department heads, and all those departments give the city budget division all of their line items, the money that they need, that they think they need to operate for the next fiscal year. So the city budget division gathers all of that, makes an initial budget, and submits that budget to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. From the last map, we know that the mayor, comptroller, and Board of Aldermen president all make up the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. So this board have budget hearings, so they review the budget that the city budget division submitted to them. They add, take away, whatever they want to do with it. And then after they're done with those hearings, they approve that initial budget. But that approved budget is not enacted into law until it goes through the Board of Aldermen. So they submit that version of the budget to the Board of Aldermen and to all of these different committees as well. And also, as the last map indicated, the Board of Aldermen president assigns committee chairs and members, and also serves on and can vote in all committees. So he's in charge of making up these committees, and he can sit on it and vote in all of them as well. So the Board of Estimate and Apportionment gives these committees the budget, and it gives it to first the Ways and Means Committee. So the main function of the Ways and Means Committee is to deal with all bills related to finances, budget, other apportionment, operation costs, whatever that happens in the city. So they're in charge of looking at all of the ordinances and bills that has anything to do with financing. So the budget is given directly to them. And the chair of that board is Joseph Vollmer from Ward 10, and then vice chair is Marlene Davis, the Alderwoman from Ward 19. It's also given to other committees. So there are 16 committees in total, standing committees. And I believe currently there's like a special coronavirus committee as well. So about 17 committees that are in the city of St. Louis amongst the Board of Aldermen. And it's also given to the Public Safety Committee, which is in the last map as well, that deals with everything public safety. So the part of the budget that outlines the needs of the Public Safety Department is given to that committee, and they consider it. And they add, increase, make amends, raise flags. And then the Ways and Means Committee, Public Safety Committee, and the other committees, and the entire Board of Aldermen gives that version of the budget back to the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. And they kind of do this, game of back and forth until they have a final version to give. Once they decide on the final version, the full Board of Aldermen votes on the budget, and if everyone votes for it, then that budget is approved, and it's the budget that is set for the next fiscal year. So the process is pretty straightforward, and they have, if you click on actually, one, you can click on these links like the budget hearings and also the budget link here to understand that process. And you can look at all of the YouTube video, all of the hearings, Board of Estimate and Apportionment hearings are live and they're transparent. So you can look at all of those live, or you can look at past hearings to see like what goes on in those between the mayor, comptroller, and the Board of Aldermen president. It's pretty interesting. So that's the budget process. Next is the legislative process. So this is how a bill becomes an ordinance. So the mayor or a policy advocacy campaign, an alder themselves can think of a bill to introduce, but only an alder can introduce a bill. So they may introduce a bill, and once they introduce a bill, they have to read it in front of the entire Board of Aldermen for the first reading. And then the Board of Aldermen president decides where that bill, which committee that bill will go to. So say if it's a bill related to policing, or say like the recent closed workhouse bill, that bill was sent to the Public Safety Committee. They consider it, they go back and forth about what's in the bill, if it's viable, and everything that they need to talk about. Once they come up with another version, or just keep it the same or change it, they read it again in front of the Board of Aldermen. If they don't like it then it goes back to the Public Safety Committee, they consider it again, and it goes back to the full board. After the third reading of the bill, the Board of Aldermen, they have to vote on it. So they have to either pass it or defeat it. If they defeat it, then it doesn't become an ordinance. But if they pass it, then it goes to the mayor. So she decides to either sign it or veto it. And if she vetoes it, then the Board of Aldermen can overturn that veto if they have 2/3 of the vote. And if everything goes smooth, then that bill becomes a municipal ordinance. So that is a very straightforward, or this is a very simplified illustration of it. But we all know that it's probably more, juicy than that in this process. The third process we're going to go over is the Civilian Oversight Board appointment process. So again, the Civilian Oversight Board is a board that's in charge of investigating police misconduct or is involved in that process. This one is pretty simple. The mayor nominates candidates for the Civilian Oversight Board, or you can apply to be nominated by the mayor. She gives those names to the Board of Aldermen. The Board of Aldermen either approves or not approves that person. And if they approve that person, then they sit on the Civilian Oversight Board. So a pretty straightforward process. And again, this annual public safety plan, which if actually happens, is very important. The Director of Public Safety is in charge of this all by himself. He writes the annual public safety plan, and he gives this plan to the Board of Aldermen. And I'm not sure if they are in charge of, or if they decide that they want to send it back and make amends. It doesn't indicate that in the ordinance, but he does deliver that to them so they can read it and understand what his philosophy is, or what his plans are to curb violent crime or to enact safety within the city. So I think that's about it. You also have people who work within the Board of Aldermen that keeps things running smoothly, like the clerk and legal counsel. The African American caucus is also a part of the board. I believe it's 10 alders within that caucus. Last time I checked. I think that's basically it for this map. And again, this is a very general overview. And if you want more information, you can also click on each one and it can, get as much depth as you want. So yeah, any questions about this?
So the one thing that I would add is that budget process in the city is often pretty critiqued across the region for it being less accessible to community members to have a voice in it than the county process, which generally happens over a longer period of time. They start in September and they approve it by the end of the year. So it's more of a 4-month period, whereas the city's process can often be more chaotic and rushed and not give as much opportunity for alders to have power in shaping it. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. But we got a few questions. So one in the chat is with the fight for local control in Kansas City, people often bring up the disaster with St. Louis Police Department after the city gained local control. I'd love to hear the panel's thoughts on combating this narrative that the failures of this STL Police Department are caused by the move to localized control. What is the best way to combat these narratives? Any of the panelists have thoughts on that? So if none of the panelists do, I would not say that that would be an accurate take on the police department. I wouldn't say that most of the problems that it experiences right now have been problems that have only existed within the last 6 years or since the Ferguson uprising. So I would locate the origin of the problem, not in the change to local control, but actually in a lot of the ways that the department is set up, how it sets up its overtime and allocation of officers across the region, the public safety policies, the lack of oversight, management of the department. I would locate those problems there and not as something within the last few years from local control.
David, this is Megan. Oh,
Go ahead.
oh no, I would just want to, I'll just back off of what you said. So I remember when the changeover happened and speaking with some local police officers in the area, and they're saying like some of the issues that had happened because of this. And I would have to say that I think it's because we did not prepare in the way that we should have. So the systems and the policies were not put in place, and it's the actors. I would not say that to not do it. I just say that we were not prepared to fully take on this responsibility at a local level.
Yeah, and the only thing I was going to add was, in my interactions with the police department for the Equity Indicators Project, the only thing that came up about the transition from back under city government was that there was definitely some rough spots in transitioning with hiring police officers. That process used to just be managed by the police department alone. Now it's managed by a combination of personnel and the police department. So those two systems have not smoothly interlocked, I would say. And so that there's definitely, but that was the only point where I heard about some of the transition back under local control related to the police department and how it actually operates. I didn't hear anything about how it changed training or many of the functions of the police department itself still are under its bubble.
And I would say also, leadership is important. Leadership matters. So if the police department isn't under local control, on a state level, you have a board of about 7 people all across the state that potentially can make decisions on the police operations and even the chief of police. And I think, we have a mayor race coming up very soon in the city of St. Louis. And if you have the right leader in these positions, when you're talking about hiring public safety directors or police chiefs, you're talking about having somebody who's competent in a leadership role that understands that we don't need to be tougher on crime, but we need to be smarter on crime. Well, I'm not advocating for police, but it's also about who's in certain positions. So when it came back to the city of St. Louis, you had Mayor Francis Slay and then our current mayor, Lyda Krewson. And I'm hoping that, the Black girl magic swings and continues to swing in Missouri and we get a Black woman for mayor. And I think that will make a huge difference, especially when you're talking about how a department operate when it has the control locally. I'd rather have it here locally where we can have a voice in the process with the right leader than if it's not here locally and the state has say so, because historically the state has never been an ally to the city of St. Louis, which is the economic engine of this state.
Any other questions from the audience before we get into the panel portion of this? Okay, then. Let's get to it.
Great, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. Cool. So I guess we'll start off panel conversation because you all like do a brief introduction, like your name, a little bit about the work you do overall regarding public safety reform. I'll start with to my right, Cristina.
I'm wondering if everyone shows up in the same tile formation for everyone else. I'm not sure. But hi, everyone. I'm Cristina Garmendia. I was the lead on the 2018 Equity Indicators Report for the City of St. Louis. And so I was hired to produce quantitative measures related to racial equity following the Ford through Ferguson report. The Ferguson Commission report. So that's most of that work was diagnosing what do we know about our public safety department. Justice for All included a whole section on policing and how should we measure racial equity in terms of policing for St. Louis City.
Great, thanks for being here. You go with Megan.
Hello, I'm Megan Betts. I'm part of Northside Neighbors United, which is over equitable development and displacement in Old North and St. Louis Place, but I'm currently a part of the Neighborhood Leadership Fellows, which is through UMSL Extension with the support from Promise Zone and STL partnership. And part of that is they've chosen 25 leaders within the Promise Zone area to do a intensive leadership program, and from that we are put into groups and we do work around issues that are affecting our community. And the work that I'm doing right now, along with Trey, who is one of my team members, is we are doing an educational campaign around defunding the police called Refund STL. Because as I think Inez spoke earlier, is that there is such I guess just so much fear around the term defund the police. So we really want to make sure that the education is there for folks to really understand what that looks like.
Cool, thanks. Next, Rasheen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Rasheen Aldridge. I'm a state representative of the 78th District. Have been active in several movements, starting from the Fight for 15 to a lot of us kind of meeting how we did when 2014 happened in Ferguson. Later was appointed to the Ferguson Commission. And from that, continued to just organize in the city of St. Louis. Later ran for office, have been part of Expect Us, and decided to eventually run for state rep of the 78th, because I think it's important. We need to make sure we have people that are in office that aren't going to be bought out and sold out, and continue to bring their values in these political spaces where we can actually push for policy change, if it's local level, state level, or all the way up on the federal level. So I appreciate everyone who put this together so we can have a real conversation on like what public safety is. I think so many times people think it's just policing, and it's also about having, healthy neighborhoods, strong communities, quality education, and actually access to a healthcare facility, not just an urgent care, but an actual hospital in your community. So appreciate it.
Absolutely. Next, Inez.
Hi, everyone. My name is Inez Bordeaux. I am an organizer with the Close to Workhouse campaign. I'm also a manager of community collaborations at ArchCity Defenders. The work that I do is organizing. That's what I do for ArchCity. That's what I do for the Close to Workhouse campaign. And the organizing I do is really centered around this idea of re-envisioning public safety, identifying the things that actually make our communities safer, make Black people safer, make the whole city safer. And so that idea revolves around this idea of divesting from carceral systems, which include the police, jails, and prisons, and investing in the things that truly make us safe, like affordable housing and healthcare and mental health services and affordable childcare. And I could literally just go on and on and on. So all of my work revolves around that idea. And then my job specifically is to reach out to other organizations in and around the greater St. Louis area that share this same vision of St. Louis that ArchCity Defenders has, which is just racial equity, or housing justice, environmental justice, help with the criminal legal system and things like that. But it all centers around this idea of how do we make our city safer for the people that are most marginalized. So that means Black people, poor people, the LGBT community, the unhoused community. And we partner with a lot of the people and organizations on this call. So that's what I do. That's why I'm here.
Great. Jay, last but not least.
Hi, yo. My name is Jay. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I am the abolitionist organizer with Action St. Louis. A lot of what Inez said is what I also do. We work on the exact same campaigns. One of my partners in organizing in abolition, but really working on divest campaigns that seek to divest from carceral systems that are harming Black folks and invest in resources for Black communities. Yeah, this work again calls for re-envisioning, reimagining what public safety looks like, really recognizing that what we have right now doesn't keep us safe, isn't working, and isn't getting to the root causes of crime and harm, and working on things that actually promote community care.
And so that's such a great transition on that concept of redefining what public safety is. So our first question, so it says that our community-based research last year, where we interviewed activists, organizers, public health officials, and department heads across the region, found that there had really been no significant successful police reform or transformation bills that have passed in the city of St. Louis in 6 years, besides the creation of the Civilian Oversight Board, which some people question how impactful it has been since it hasn't led to any actual charges for any officers in its years of existence. And so our question to you all is, what does a transformed public safety system look like in the city of St. Louis? What are the biggest barriers to that transformed system and to accountability for our public safety system? And if people in the audience want to say their vision for transformed public safety, please sound off in the comments.
I can go first. Let me look at the question again. I remember the question, but I want to make sure. What does a transformed public safety system look like in St. Louis City? For me, like the biggest way that we transform public safety in and around the St. Louis area is, again, by starting with the closure of the workhouse, which we're there on that. And then just continuing the cycle of like, what's next? What else can we divest from? With the closing of the workhouse, we now have $16 million that we get to invest in Black people and communities. And like, when was the last time that the city invested multiple millions of dollars in Black folks? You know what I'm saying? In these marginalized, neglected, historically neglected communities. When was the last time you saw something like that? I can tell you when the last time you saw it. Never is when you've seen it. So like, that is the very first step in, you know, going into the communities. What a lot of the work that Jay and I have done has been going into the communities and asking people, well, what do you need? What would make you feel safe? And the comments that we get all the time are like, we want a community center for our children and our teenagers. We want housing that doesn't have lead. We don't want these vacant buildings torn down and the asbestos and the other environmental factors that are affecting us. We don't want dumping in our neighborhoods. We want access to affordable healthcare and childcare and all of these things. And I know I said all of these things earlier, and I'm going to keep repeating them because these are the things that actually make us safe. When the St. Louis Police Department gets $236 million of the general fund budget, that's 53% of the general fund budget. Meanwhile, our health department gets somewhere around $1.5 million. Did you know that you can't even go to the health department in St. Louis City and get tested for STDs anymore? Like, you can't. And that's just one example. Do you know, out of our general fund budget, $0 of our general fund budget goes towards services for the unhoused? Like, when the police are getting that much of our money, like, we can't possibly be safe, because based on those numbers and the number of police officers that we have in the city, they keep telling us that they're around 140 officers short. St. Louis City has more police officers than other cities that are comparable size. We have far too many police officers for the size of our city. So when you think about all those little things, the things that, you know, are not being invested in, the people that are not being cared for, you know what I'm saying? And you think about the amount of money that the police get, like, they're our largest expenditure. So when we talk about re-envisioning public safety, when the city and our elected officials are telling us we don't have enough money, and I look at the budget and I see that most of our money are going to the police, I want to take some of that money. So like, that's how we get there, by divesting from these carceral systems. They get more money than anybody. Why should they get more money than the health department when they don't actually solve any crime? Think about it. They get all of that money and our crime rates are this high. Why is that? Why are we giving them all of this money and they're not even doing their jobs? Why are we giving them this much money and they literally only spend 4% of their time dealing with violent crime in St. Louis? The majority of the time that St. Louis Metropolitan Police Department is on the streets, they're giving traffic tickets. They're showing up to calls that they are not qualified to deal with. So why don't we take some of that money and give it to the people that actually know what to do with it? I hope that answers the question. Yeah. You know, sometimes I get on a roll
I'm glad
and it just all starts coming out. So
the only thing I would add is, you know, again, like, who are our true first responders for public safety? It's not the police, it's teachers, it's social workers, it's all the people that have relationships with vulnerable people on the ground, you know, with teenagers. And so like Inez said, like, we don't put money towards those important things. Like, the city doesn't even have a role in the public school system. And even though, of course, it affects everything that we do. So I think, you know, that's the vision for a public safety system, is one that's focused on preventing crime from happening and supporting people to live healthy lives. And that involves, you know, providing jobs that, you know, take away the incentives for crime, mental health services that take away the, you know, behaviors that lead to crime. Housing would solve a lot of the cases that our municipal court sees are related to homelessness. A lot of the interactions police have are with the, you know, people who are experiencing homelessness. Like, we could solve those problems at the start with other services, other than, policing comes at the back end after a crime has already occurred.
Oh, here we go. So when I look at the question, I see a couple things jump out to me is resistance, barriers, and accountability. I mean, I think we're all on the same page of what our communities, what has been divested in our communities. And so it is who are the decision makers that make sure that we are getting those things. So you say, what are the biggest barriers to transformation accountability? And it is elections and elected officials. And so I would say that for me, when I look at, what's important around public safety is who are you voting in? So know how they stand on public safety is questioning those. I mean, I feel like our elections are, we don't really get to dive in to really hear what people's plans are. So I think we need to be asking more questions of these folks that are running for office of what, how do you see, how would you change this budget? How will you help us like with real policies and legislation and not just catchy phrases that, that's.
Thanks, Megan. I'm gonna pass it to Trey. The next question.
Yeah. So this next question is more like a clarifying question. I know in my personal conversations around defund the police, you either get one or two actions. You get like, of course, that it's like, of course we should do that. Or it's like, that doesn't sound like the greatest idea. Like, what is your plans for that? And I think like the whole language around defunding the police can be off-putting to some people. So this question is directed to either Jay or Inez, but it's open to the whole panel. Can you explain what defunding the police is and how it's different from police reform? And then why is this conversation in action an important one?
Yeah. So I would define defunding the police as this process of reallocating funds and responsibilities from police departments and into community-based systems of safety, prevention, and de-escalation. It's similar to models of divestment and investment, like what we were able to accomplish with closing the workhouse, right? It's taking away funds from the police and putting them into our communities. It's not fully abolishing the police. I think it's a step in the direction of abolition, but it's really stripping away some of the size and scope and power of the police, right? Yeah, and because the police can't be reformed, right? Like, how do you reform a system that the essence of their power is the discretion to use violence, and that they will do it in every means, and that the courts don't hold accountable or limit the amount of power that they have, right? It's also, I think, a cry to like demilitarize the police, right? Like, and this stripping away funds from these militarized weapons that they use at protesters, at civilians, and ask like why the police are using guns in our schools, with mental health care, with folks experiencing domestic violence. There's no really reforming that system. There have been reforms in New York, for example, on no chokehold, and still Eric Garner was murdered and strangled to death by the police, right? There's really the law is never going to hold the police accountable because the police aren't accountable to the law or enforce the law, right? Which is why defunding the police is the only response to me.
I'd just like to add that as far as like ArchCity Defenders is concerned, like we've seen the abuses of policing in this region in like so many ways, from the for-profit policing in municipalities like Ferguson, from all the way across the region to the daily indignities and harassment experienced by the unhoused population in our streets, to the all too regular deaths that are inflicted by officers at a rate higher than any other city, like in the country. Like we have sued them multiple times for violations over the years. And if suing them will not change their behavior, like what else will? Like what else will? And then just to add, well, I don't know if I really need to add anything to what Jay said. Like when we say defund the police, like we mean take that money away and give it to someone else. You know what I'm saying? Give it to someone else. So like the example that I used earlier today, like when your house is on fire, you call 911 and firefighters show up because those are the professionals. Like what are police trained to do? They're trained to see people as a threat, to carry a gun, to shoot and kill them. And for 99% of the situations that people in daily life in St. Louis are living through, what they don't need is someone with a badge and a gun showing up. That is not the appropriate response, but yet the police have been set as this catch-all. Okay, you have a problem with an unhoused person, fine, call the police. You have a drug overdose, call the police. You have someone with a mental health crisis, call the police. You have a child in danger, call the police. What if when those things occurred, we actually sent someone who was qualified and trained to deal with that specific problem? What if when you called 911 because a child doesn't feel safe, that like a counselor and a child welfare advocate showed up to help that person in that family? Like, how would that change just the relationship with that family to their neighborhood and that neighborhood to our community? Like, how does that affect? Like, how would that affect us? CapCar has this campaign called like the Real Public Safety Campaign. I don't know if you guys have seen like the little, not billboards, but little signs and stuff on the bus stops that says, hey, what if when you saw this person overdosing or whatever, like a mental health professional showed up instead of the police? Like, how would that change that person's life? So defunding the police is me. I am very anti-police, and you can tell them I said it, but like, it's not just about being anti-police. It's about making sure the right people are being paid for the job that needs to be done. And right now in St. Louis, that is not happening. It has never happened. And I understand why people are scared of the idea of defunding the police, because you just think it would be chaos all out in the streets. But what are the police doing right now? What are they doing right now? Are they doing anything right now? Are they solving any crimes right now? Are they making our community safer right now? It's almost like they're not even here. And yet $136 million every year for the pleasure of that. Let's give that money to caseworkers, social workers. Like, let's hire more EMTs. Let's hire mental health professionals. Let's do all of those things and actually achieve the true public safety that every single person walking the streets of the city wants.
Thanks for
And,
that.
and I would just add, you know, a lot of times we see, so this defund word isn't anything new. I guess it's more of an issue because it's saying police. It's like when folks start to say Black Lives Matter, it's like, what does this mean? It means what it says. And the reason I say that is because when you think about it, for the last couple of years, even just this current session, we have defunded education. We defund mental health. We defund human services. We defund our parks. We defund after-school opportunities and programs for young people. We defund a lot, but now that clearly there's a problem, and I remember once upon a time when the city of St. Louis had enough officers to patrol crime at a number they wanted, and we still had high crime, to where we are now, where we're down officers and we still have high crime. And what folks are saying is clearly within this department, no matter even a residency, there's a problem. There's a problem where the city of St. Louis not only can retain officers after a 7 or 8 year grandfather clause where they would go to the county. There's a problem because the city of St. Louis police officers continue to have situations where they're killing unarmed individuals and no justice is served. There's a problem in the department where you have to have a Black police association and a white police association. So instead of continuing to put more than 50% of the budget, more than 50% of our city budget to public safety, which is policing, how about we take some of those funds and while we defunded education or we defunded some of the parks, or we defunded money for the city of St. Louis to be able to give back to these communities, how about we put some of those funds back into those areas of services that actually are going to uplift communities and not just be tougher on communities or try to instrict laws and policies that make it where individuals don't want to feel like they actually are listening or that they're actually part of a neighborhood. A lot of people in our communities just are existing. We didn't defunded our neighborhoods. We didn't defunded communities to the bare bone. I mean, you walk down the street and you see buildings falling down, and in some parts of the ward, you don't even have sidewalks for people to be able to walk down. So they become to have this mentality of they're just existing and they're not part of the neighborhood because we didn't defund it, the backbone of what really make communities strong, which we know is not policing. So how about we take some of those funds and we reallocate it back into those same communities, which was a Team Forward plan, or however you want to look at it, where we defunded a lot of areas north of Delmar where you see a lot of high crime because the lack of opportunity, of opportunity to thrive isn't there anymore because we didn't defunded that. And that's been okay. But now that we say we want to defund law enforcement or police officers, it's this fear of, which is real, and Arnez talked about it, of communities not being safe because, oh, we're not going to have officers on our street. But I mean, I'm only 26 years old. No shade to everybody on here. I'm only 26. I can remember when we had a little bit more, like we had community centers in the neighborhood. We had playgrounds. We had things for young people to do and for the community to be engaged with each other where it was more of a sense of neighborhood because those funds were there. But now all those funds have been defunded for our neighborhood, where if we reallocate what actually we could have, like Arnez and Jay have said, instead of looking at police being the safeguard, instead of looking at if we had resources in our community and the lady on your block or the gentleman on your block, and that made that neighborhood strong without law enforcement, if we had those resources to do things in our communities where we had a strong neighborhood, things wouldn't be the same. And I think that's what people are saying when they talk about defunding the police. Let's reallocate, let's reimagine, let's put those funds back in the community that need it the most. Let's not be equal, let's be equitable about it. We know some communities need it more than others. So let's put those resources back in the communities that we have defunded for the last decade before even I was around.
Thanks for that, Rasheen. So our next question is to Cristina. What role does data, or in a lot of cases, a lack of data, play in conversations and work around police accountability and transforming public safety?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So there's a couple points I wanted to make on the role of data and police accountability. All right, so the first thing is something you've heard probably a lot is you can't change what you can't measure. But also at the same token, the other side of the coin is what we do measure changes how we behave and changes how we do our job. So the measures of success was one of the questions I asked every department when I was looking for equity indicators, because those measures of success really tell you how people do their jobs. You see it in journalism. You know, if your performance is measured in clicks, you get a lot of clickbait. If you're a teacher that, you know, and the measure of success is your students' test scores, it makes it hard for teachers not to just teach to the test. You know, it changes how you do your job. And for police, the measures of success for police are pretty they're pretty negative interactions. They're traffic stops, they're arrests, and that changes how the police prioritize their time. And so one of the conversations I had with Chief Hayden when planning and discovering what potentially could be used for the equity indicators was the things they weren't measuring. So Chief Hayden campaigned for his job on the basis of bringing in community-oriented policing. Problem is, we don't measure anything related to that. We don't measure how often police have positive interactions with the community. And we have almost never measured community trust in police. There's lots of departments around the country that do regularly survey residents about levels of trust in police as an institution. And, you know, and that's something we don't do here in St. Louis. But can you imagine how different our police department would be and the work that police officers do if they were measured and promoted on the basis of how many positive interactions they had with the community, or with how much trust is built up in the community towards police? It would change a lot of what they do. They would probably spend a lot more time out of their cars. So that's another point, you know, that I think is really what we do measure really does influence how officers are encouraged to do their jobs. They are measured based off of arrests. And so that's why we have a lot more traffic stops, because officers are looking for arrests. And so the third thing I wanted to mention was that there's some level of system ignorance. So you also asked about how data has to do with public safety transformation. I was tasked with finding indicators and data from all different aspects of the justice system. So not only did I look at policing, I also looked up and down the food chain, you know, and how events occur. So I was looking at municipal court as well as the circuit court. I was looking at, you know, what motivates, you know, what's leading to this high arrest rate or high traffic stops. And a lot of it goes back to our municipal court, you know, that's issuing an incredible amount of municipal warrants for missed court dates or missed payments. And that's something we don't really talk about as how it impacts public safety. But we do know that courts' behavior, court policy changes how police behave. So let's take the juvenile court. One story I heard from the juvenile court, which is the circuit court, is that they were no longer going to be taking cases for certain types of activities. So if a police officer brought in a kid for a certain type of charge, they weren't going to do anything with it. They were going to drop the case. And so that led to a 90% drop of juvenile arrests because the police stopped bringing in those kids for those types of charges. And that had a downstream effect on, you know, the things that police prioritized based on what the courts would do with that information. So they're definitely connected, and all these different systems interact in ways that the courts were kind of ignorant about the impact, that not knowing why people weren't showing up for court dates, they were not even paying attention to that. They didn't see it as a problem, even though it put a lot of people at risk of being arrested if they got stopped for a light out, and a headlight out or something, you know, minor like that. If they had a warrant out for missing a court date or not paying a traffic fine, they could be arrested. So that's something, you know, there was just a level of, well, that's not my job. You know, my job is to enforce, you know, if people don't show up to their court date, like, I got to put a warrant out. So there's just kind of this like siloed thinking about, you know, the role that their division had in terms of affecting justice. So I think there was that's something that's happening across the justice system, is there's all these little fiefdoms. People are just putting their heads down and doing what they were told or trained to do, and not thinking about how they fit in to the big picture and how it actually impacts people and communities. So that was something I think is connecting the dots. Data can help you really connect the dots between these different actors in the system. And then lastly, the last point I want to make about this is the role, what the role data can play is about reports. Reports are really byproducts of what's happening inside that system. So there's lots of, we talked about the public safety plan that people hadn't read or heard of. Municipal court is also another division that's supposed to be putting out annual reports of what they do every year, and they hadn't since the 90s. So those reports are byproducts of leadership and the will of leadership, interest in what's happening, internal capacity. Do they even have anyone who can do statistics, run a data analysis, which is not always the case. A police department, fortunately, does not have that problem. They do have analysts, but most departments don't. And curiosity, a sense of curiosity of how you're doing, and a culture of improvement. How can we make the justice system work better? That seems to be a question we ask a lot from the outside. It's not always a question that people are asking inside. So those are my four main thoughts on this. The role that data can play in terms of holding institutions accountable. It's complicated for sure, but really what I think it would be a huge impact if we could have leaders choose things and to put out information about what matters to them, because it does change behavior and does change incentives. It's just human nature.
Thanks for that, Cristina. I really appreciate you walking us through those. I'm going to pass it to Trey, but wanted to add the one other place that I think about is use of force statistics and incidents of misconduct, and how our city doesn't have a public-facing database or reporting requirement around that, which can make it hard for community members to advocate.
Yeah, and we should flop the St. Louis Public Radio story on the lack of the use of force database by reporter Kay Petrin. So I don't know if anyone can find that real quick and plop that in there, but that really was the lack of standardized reporting on that. I mean, I kind of had to pull teeth to get use of force in the report itself, because they just weren't used to reporting it. And they didn't have the data in the way that mattered. It wasn't related. They weren't collecting it based on people who were affected, victims. It was all the data that they were collecting as a department was centered on police officers and whether a police officer was injured in the course of deploying use of force, which is, so it's just a wild show of priorities.
I just dropped down the
Thanks.
Right.
Cool. This next question is directed at Megan. So, in considering your roles in community development, and your close, proximity to community voices, what role does community voice currently play in city public safety policies, and then what role should they play as you work towards transforming public safety?
Okay, so I would say, what role does it play right now? I would first say that if we look back maybe a couple years ago, well, first of all, it should be the center no matter what. Public, public community, whatever, community input should be the center for any policies. But as far as what we spoke about, somebody spoke about earlier about how our city budget and the public safety budget and how that is addressed on a public level versus what the county does. It's kind of a rush process, and folks don't really know how to be involved, and really there's no outreach around that from elected officials and others in that capacity. But I would say that really, I think the role is really starting to change, and I would put all that on the work that was done by the Close the Workhouse campaign. With that campaign, we saw that when you take a policy and you have it led by folks that are most impacted, and those folks are on the ground in the communities, like going door to door, finding out how people really feel, then more people are able to jump on to that campaign and feel a sense of connection to it. And so I think that if we are able to, as organizations and as, you know, even elected officials, when you're writing policies, if you can mimic the work that was done by that campaign, we will definitely see more wins, just like what happened with Close the Workhouse. As somebody that, when I first started out in finding out how to be involved in my community and what was going on, I would often go to committee hearings, Board of Aldermen hearings. And I mean, that took a lot of time on my part. It was during the day. I was lucky that I was able to stay at home while my kids were at school. And I would often find that, especially in the committee hearings, that when folks that were able to make it, did speak up potentially against what an elected official might be saying, is that there was a lot of pushback on how that elected official felt, such as like the potential sense of entitlement that just because they were elected, they totally understood their community's needs and wants. And I think that we have to continue to build and push, just like Close the Workhouse did, because oftentimes if you watch those hearings, you can hear elected officials saying things that contradicted what their residents that were standing in front of them were saying. And so I think that, so accountability on that, but, you know, most importantly is, it's just us organizations making sure that we're including those voices and that we're not like leading from how we feel. And so one of the other things I go back to is my views on cameras in neighborhoods. And I think Inez has spoke on this before, is that when you ask folks, especially in my community, when you ask folks about what they want, you're going to hear them say they want cameras. They want cameras in our community because all of the you know, everything we have had, mental health, the schools, everything has been defunded, as Rasheen said, all of that has been defunded. And so then when all that we have left are our options are police and cameras, and the police aren't there because they don't want to come over or respond to calls or whatever, then it's the next thing is cameras. And so when you come to a community and tell them that you're gonna, you know, potentially defund the police, folks get scared. So we have to have these conversations with people. Our organizations have to have these one-on-ones with folks, explaining to them like, this is what we mean, this is why we mean what we mean, and how it really impacts you. And again, as Inez said earlier, you know, I always tell people, police do not solve crimes. That is not their job. So we could have, you know, all these police, but they are not, they are reactionary. So they are not there to stop anything. So it is, you know, it is on us to make sure that we are leading campaigns that get folks excited and that also are able to smash that fear-based, I guess, misinformation that is happening right now, that defunding the police is that we're just going to leave folks to, you know, just do whatever they want. So just to kind of wrap it up is community role is huge. Again, I would just say that if Close the Workhouse could just write a little book for all of us and we could just all kind of take that and you know, take that with our organizations and really institute that stuff of having those most impacted lead, I think we'll start to see more changes across the board.
We did. We wrote 2 reports.
Okay.
I can promise you that your elected officials have not read it. So like, we tried that. We might have to try something different.
Okay.
I would not be surprised if our elected official in our ward, which me and Megan are in together, that I think she said something important for us having like electeds trying to speak for the ward on certain issues. Probably didn't read their report and don't speak for the larger ward.
Yeah, the one who roller skated in the workhouse when they were a kid. Okay, I was just making sure.
I mean, I would, and I just like to go off of that is that when, you know, and this might be going off, David, but is that when folks say that, I think it also, that goes back to a community education piece that's kind of lacking is that when you're only voted in by 20% of voters, just understand that yes, there are people that do support you, but there's a big group of views that you're potentially not getting included when you make policy. So what is that next step that you need to do to get those folks involved? Or what organizations can you reach out to that know those folks?
Great point, everybody. Thanks. So we've got 2 more questions and a little bit of time for the audience to ask any questions that they have. So this next one is about the police union contract, which we've seen some people mention in the comments, and Trey talked about it a lot. So could someone talk a little bit more about in what ways the police union and that collective bargaining agreement, how does it stand in the way of police accountability? Why is it an important place that we should put energy to change it?
The fact that the whole thing is done in secret, I think, should be the largest indicator that something is wrong. The fact that not even our elected officials have access to the line item budget of the police department, I think should tell us everything that we need to know. The fact that the head of the police union is an unabashed, flagrant racist, I think should tell us everything that we need to know. And I truly believe that getting at the heart of what's in that, but first of all, the police are standing in the way of police accountability through the collective bargaining agreement that they are doing with the city. And I think the heart of getting at that is finding a way to make that budget publicly accessible so that every single person who pays that 1% city tax that I see on my paycheck every time I get paid, that literally goes toward funding the police, that we all have access to that information, because sunlight is the best disinfectant. Once we can see that budget, what that budget looks like, and once we have more say, like we should have more say so, or at least we should have a say so about, you know, the terms of that collective bargaining agreement, because it is us that they are killing. They are not doing a good job. Why do we keep extending that contract and keep giving them grace that they have not earned? Not only are they not solving crimes, not only are they only spending 4% of their time dealing with violent crime, but they're killing a disproportionate amount of Black people, and they kill more people per capita than any other police department in the country. And we are a city of 300,000 people, if that. So all of those things put together is like why this needs to be our near singular focus, because nothing else great can happen in the city of St. Louis unless we do something about the police here.
And I mean, everything, I'm on a panel with 4 like amazing women. So everything that they say, I really don't need to say anything. I mean, everything that Inez said is like 110% true. Only thing that I would just, add to it is, there's a problem with the police union. And I don't think people understand how powerful they are and the idea of what a union is. And there's a problem in the carpenters trade union. There's a problem in the construction union. There's a problem within all the unions. But the idea of what the union's supposed to be, the police department have took that to like a whole nother level of not only using this, they already have this blue code of brotherhood, and then they use this union protection if anything happens to an officer, even if they're wrong, as like an extra force of defense, which is so strong and powerful. Not only are they donating to candidates that may be running for your mayor or potentially your mayor, but they're also running and supporting candidates that are running on, you know, presidential level. So the police union is taking not only their brotherhood, but they like hiding behind this union as also another defense of this is a way that we must protect our people in this organization. And when you look at every other union, which I feel like each union has problems, I'm not saying that, but the police union has took this ability to hide behind like this union into, even if a police officer has been committed to something, they're able to get their brothers and sisters, as they say in the union, to bail them out very quickly, even if they potentially been proven guilty. Or, I mean, with all the video camera that we have, most officers, you don't even need a verdict because we know how the way the law works, and it works for some and it doesn't work for others. With video images, they still get out these police officers. So the union, outside of even their contract, which is so secretive, like Inez said, then they have this backing of political affiliates, business organizations. When you talk about like following the money, they're hiding behind this union that makes it even harder to be able to make changes sometimes. I mean, we know we'll take to the streets and do whatever possible, but they're also like in the legislative process, they buying people out in short terms. And I don't know how to say it and like not being nice, but they are. You know, unions writing check to elected officials to stand with them because they can write you a check. And that's a problem also because of the union mentality, but the police association has took that union mentality to a whole nother level. There is no other probably powerful union like the police association outside of your hardworking people of the carpenters, which they need to be more diverse and hire more Black people, or your SEIU or your bricklayers and all that, like the hardworking women. But then you bring in this police union, which is even more, it's problematic. It's so problematic outside of their contract being not public to the people, on top of the way they use the union to be another like line of defense of what's right and wrong. And the union's supposed to be there to be, if you are wrongfully accused or whatever, just if something happens, they will be there for you. But if you did something where you was actually wrong, like they shouldn't be standing there with you. And the police union, no matter what, always stand with their police officers, wrong or right. And that's even more of a barrier as we talk about of trying to address the root cause of the problem within the police department.
I think it's unfair to call them a union. It makes other unions look bad. They are not a labor union. They are not a union like the carpenters or SIS. I always want to say SEIU, but I know it's SIUE. Like I think it's unfair to other unions to even label them a union. I consider them an extortion racket. They fearmonger and they get people all keyed up, and then they basically go in and demand these outrageous things where they want complete anonymity. How is it that we don't have access to police officers, you know, discipline files after they've gone out here and abused people or killed people? Like, this is an extortion racket is how they've been able to do this. If you think about the relationships that they have with businesses in the business corridors, like downtown in the Central West End, where they have the backings of these people and these businesses, because they feel like, or they've basically made these businesses feel like, well, if you don't have us there, then what's going to happen to your business? And then out of fear, like, these businesses and business owners support them, which we would need a whole nother 2 hours for Zoom. And I'm sorry, I jumped in and I spoke twice. I apologize.
Hey, you're bringing all the wisdom, so I don't think, I don't mind. I don't think the audience minds. Jay, did you want to have something to say?
Yeah. Police unions they operate outside of what we know of typical unions, right? Like they're organizing to prevent community control and accountability. The contracts allow them to have rights everyday citizens don't have and decrease transparency. We can't find info about police records for folks in our community. When there is an allegation of assault, they are given cover to prevent investigation. They are a fraternal order of police. It's not about collective bargaining, it's about protecting and expanding their power. They weigh in on politics, and there's no public input for the contract negotiations this year, and we should be concerned about that. Also, diversity doesn't stop police violence. We need to reduce the power and the resources of the police and the scope of their power, right? Also, want to lovingly nudge that it's Inez, and I'm not a woman, I'm non-binary, my pronouns are they, them, theirs.
Thanks for that clarification, Jay.
Yep.
So one piece around the contract. So it was supposed to, with that 3-year period, it would usually be approved in July, the beginning of July. They didn't come to agreement on it, so it is still, there's a way with the contract that if a new one is not approved, then it just continues on until they come to agreement on a new contract. So we're still under an old agreement because the negotiations stalled. And so please be on the lookout for Violence Prevention Commission is focusing on this right now. Homegrown is focusing on this, and Ford through Ferguson is also really keyed in on this issue. In the county, which our next panel is going to be on the county, they have their sergeants or lieutenants union contract coming up for renegotiation starting this month. So it's definitely a really timely issue across St. Louis. So for our last question that we have as we round out the night, and please stick around at the end because we like to do like a group picture because we can't be in person. But we still want to show the community that's here. So our last question is aimed at Rasheen, and then if anybody else wants to join in after, what are the statewide implications for policing policy in St. Louis, and what's the current statewide conversation?
I mean, I suggest anybody jump in. It's probably more happening on a local level than the state level. And I'm gonna be real, in this little short term of a year that I've been there, grateful to be elected for another 2 years, there hasn't been any conversation around criminal justice reform. There hasn't been the things that we're talking about like here today, is not happening on the state level. You have right now, the Senate was just in, like I say, 2 days ago, and then last week, I'm getting lost with the weeks earlier. No, yeah, last week the House went in. There's no conversations happening around like how do we really address criminal justice reform. And when you're talking about a body that is filled by the Democrats are super majority. We're like 49 members to the rest of the House is 162 people. So we're super majority in the House, and they rather have conversations around, and I'm gonna just be real, things that they want to, especially in an election year, like pander to their base, abortion, broadband for rural areas. But when you talk about criminal justice, we were just called back into a session by our governor, and I like naming people by name, so excuse me, but I mean our governor, Mike Parsons. Once again, like I started off in this conversation earlier, you have a governor that has not been elected to his position, nor an attorney general that was elected in their position. Both was appointed, but our governor that wanted to call a special session around violence. And the certain things he wanted to talk about was incarcerating juveniles at the age of 12 and charging them as adults, giving police residency, meaning that they can live an hour out from the areas that they pose to protect and serve, which I was against. But I at least try to have an amendment that put it at 30 minutes so that they can be North County or South County, where they actually kind of understand the community more, not far out Lake St. Louis. Passed some legislation where juveniles can get a gun without their parents' consent, another bill that was supposed to fund witness protection program, but it is a bill that has no funding on a state level. So in short terms, everything I'm saying when it comes to the state politics, that's why like when I see people like Jay and Arnez and like putting pressure on like our board of aldermen and making sure they actually do things like closing the workhouse and so many other things that actually create change. Like politics start on a local level. And especially our local leaders here, because we got an election, let's not forget, coming up in 2021. All odd numbers in the city of St. Louis. So, you know, that's 1, 3, 5, 5, 7, 9 will be up on the ballot. And that's when, you know, we can do more here locally than we can on a state level. You know, we have to want to have fighters on the state level. So it's an honor to be up there. But when you talk about like, what are we implementing? I'm not going to sit here and sell anybody like any dreams of like the state is really implementing anything, because when you're talking about an election year and they're trying to attack a Black woman, Kim Gardner, because she's charging the McCausleys for something that was actually wrong by pointing a firearm at a group of individuals, no matter how you see it, a loaded firearm at individuals. And you have leaders that are our governor and attorney general that's trying to get back at her instead of actually address the root cause of crime in the city of St. Louis and Kansas City. On the state level, we have not done much. You know, we got people like Senator Rasheen, Carla May, Brian Williams on the Senate side that are fighting, and myself, Lakeisha Bosley on the House side that's fighting, but they're not really addressing criminal justice reform. We have to do this, and just being real, we got to do this on our own in the city of St. Louis and pass stuff and hold our alder people accountable to get it done. And if the state want to sue us, then we'll have that battle afterwards. But they don't really care about real criminal justice reform. When we're talking about after school programs, I serve on the budget committee. So I know how important it is to make sure we allocate money to certain things that actually improve our community. Right now in this election year, that's not their focus. Their focus is getting their party elected. Our focus is uplifting people that have historically been hurt in the last couple of years due to the systems that are in place. So we aren't doing anything. You got people fighting, but as far as like delivering true policy, we're not. And that's why it's important that we put pressure. Our board of aldermen go back in session in a couple of weeks. I know they don't break to like September or something, but they go back in session. And as you've seen through Jay and Arnez, like we was able to close the workhouse on a local level, until we get as many people potential like up in the House of Representatives. This is where we can make it be done on the local level of actually enacting policy and change that creates real criminal justice reform. Because right now you have leaders that are in rural Missouri. They don't care about Missouri until it's time to attack them and trying to take power away from the Black woman that just won her seat not once, but twice overwhelmingly. That's when they really want to care about having say-so in the city of St. Louis. But outside of that, they do not care about real criminal justice reform. So what have we done on the state level? I hate to be like pessimistic because I'm super optimistic about things. We haven't done much, especially when you're talking about election year. You have a governor, Mike Parsons, November 3rd, election day, y'all. That is running for office, that is trying to use the city of St. Louis as a political propaganda to get reelected. They're not really caring about real criminal justice reform that we need to move our city forward. I mean, we're going to do it, I feel like, in the city of St. Louis on our own because we're resilient and we're great. But when you're talking about state legislation that changes whole state of Missouri, that's not their focus. They rather do politics over people, and that's just really the reality. But we have people that are at least fighting back and killed the juvenile bill on the House side. It came back up on the Senate side, or not the juvenile bill, the Kim Gardner language on the House side came back up on the Senate side. We'll see where we go from there. But I mean, Jay and Arnez and everybody with Action St. Louis and closing the workhouse, like that's what we need to be getting behind, because that's change that you can see instantly compared to state policy that takes sometimes a little longer.
Thanks for that, Rasheen. So we're at the end of our time, and I want to give everybody a chance to kind of give one closing thought or statement. So if you could leave the people with one or two sentences, no more than that, on how they can get involved with the ways that you're transforming public safety.
This is Megan. I'll go first. So I would say I need you all to go to Refund STL on Facebook. There's a survey on there right now that we are trying to get folks' feelings on defunding the police and then how they would like to see that happen in their communities. And then from that, we'll be releasing a website with educational stuff and links to the organizations that are doing the work, like Action, St. Louis ArchCity Defenders, Close the Workhouse. And so please check that out. Like I said, we have the Facebook, Refund STL, and website coming soon.
Thanks, Megan.
The only thing I would add, so, you know, for the year that I was working on the equity indicators, I was inside the mayor's office. So I had a really good insight into, you know, how much every protest, every march, the constant drumbeat of asking for accountability, it does wear them down. It does. So, and it really keep it up. And every action does have, it will take a lot. Because something about St. Louis right now, they're like allergic to accountability. They don't know how to do it anymore. So we have to show them.
Thanks for that, Cristina. Anyone else? Your one or two sentences?
Action STL is working on a defund campaign. So if you're interested in that work, I'm gonna drop a link in the chat to volunteer. Follow us on socials. We have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, for more information about that campaign and ways to get involved with Action. Thank y'all.
Thanks for that, Jay. Rasheen, Inez.
Yeah, I'm gonna start off by saying thank you, David, and everybody with 4 through Ferguson. Sorry for the alarm. For some friends, I know it just will not stop. Trust me, I replaced it and it just won't. But we'll fix that later. But I would also say, you know, follow Expect Us as a group that I'm part of that's been doing direct action in the city of St. Louis. That's trying to put pressure on certain entities, especially our police system, to actually change and get more people involved, as well as I would tell folks to follow Action St. Louis that has been doing actual like direct demands when you're talking about defunding the police. It's something with Close the Workhouse they've been doing for years, but as well as have like a blueprint of how do we move our city from where it is to where it can be. So those would be my comments.
Please reach out to us at archcitydefenders.org. Also, you can reach the Close the Workhouse campaign at closetheworkhouse@gmail.com if you are interested in volunteering. Between Action, Arch City Defenders, and the work that Close the Workhouse specifically is doing, there's a lot of projects coming down the pipe around like defunding the police, the participatory budgeting process for the $16 million now that the workhouse is closing. So if you want to get active, like I promise we can find something for you to do.
Thanks so much, everybody. We really appreciate you being here. So this is the first in our series of talking with community leaders who are advancing public safety transformation and also providing community accountability tools so that we can demystify and take away the cloudiness from who has the power to change our public safety system, the official decision-making power to change our public safety system. A lot of community members have a ton of power to leverage to change the systems. And so we really appreciate you here. Our next teach-in is going to be Wednesday, September 9th We have a great lineup there too. We'll have Dr. LJ Punch, John Chasnoff with Coalition Against Police Crimes and Repression. We'll have Heather Taylor from the Ethical Society of Police. And we'll also have 2 members of the County Council, Councilwoman Rita Days, and then Councilwoman Lisa Clancy. So please tune in for that, and the link is in the chat. So please stay engaged, and we look forward to connecting with you all. So I'm actually, before you all head out, going to promote everybody to panelists so that you can come in here and turn on your video if you want, and we'll just do a quick wave together before we close out the night. So I'm going to start letting people in. There are a lot of y'all. This is like the Zoom world now. How can we be in virtual rooms together? And so just trying to facilitate that.
Look at everybody.
Dr. Punch, turn on your video if you'd like. We'd love to see you. Letting Lucy in, Maud. Thanks, Pamela, for being here.
Hey, Miss Byrne.
I would say all the new people coming in, if y'all want to turn your video on, we'd love to see y'all.
Yeah, please
See faces.
turn your video on if you can, and
Hey, Mr. Conley.
we'd love to take a group picture with all you wonderful people. Okay, I got 3 people left.
Hey, Miss Buckley.
Awesome. So yeah, if people want to turn their videos on, if you're comfortable, please do. And I'm going to turn the record on, and we'll just do a wave. So if anybody else wants to turn your video on, welcome you to. No worries if you don't want to, but it's great to be in community, even virtually. Okay, so I'm going to turn the video on, or record on. Okay. Thanks for being part of this conversation on the really important cause for transforming public safety, because people's lives depend on it, and the future of our region depends on it. So thanks for being here with us, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Bye, everybody.
Wow.
Thank you all.